I bet you thought this episode was going to be about healthcare. Well, no, you're fucking wrong. It's about space. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the most opinionated space podcast on the internet.
Ad Astra, the podcast where we talk about the intersection between space, policy, and technology.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton.
I have a master's of public policy degree with a concentration in science and space policy.
And I'm a PhD in computer science and an all-around tech geek.
All right, guys, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at @AdAstra_podcast, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our mailing list on elemental.fm to get regular updates from the team. And if you like what you hear, give us a review on iTunes and recommend us on Overcast. That's a 5-star review.
That's a 5-star review.
We don't accept anything else.
If you give us a 5-star review, and I know this is cheesy and other shows do it, but we'll read it on the air. How's that sound? We'll read it on the air, and because if it's from you, I don't care what it is. Jack will read whatever you write on the air.
Hey.
And also, don't forget to listen to our other shows on the Elemental FM network. There's Reminiscent, where our producer and founder of the podcast network, Tom Kelly, chat with his best friend of 15 years about life, the universe, and everything. And as well as the Straight Up podcast, the audiobook service for source material for the latest news. Coming up soon, we'll have read some interesting readings about net neutrality, as well as Donald Trump Jr.'s emails. And Jack, I believe you just recently did a reading on the pod as well, on Straight Up.
Yeah, I did a reading of the CBO report about the bill that as of recording this, they're still debating the bill. HR 1628, which is in the Senate. It's the Obamacare repeal. I read the CBO report on that you've heard everybody talk about. So be sure to head on over to the Straight Up podcast. It's on Facebook, Twitter, all those things, and check out the link to those awesome episodes.
Yeah. So anyway, today on this podcast, the Ad Astra podcast, we have a ton of topics to get through. So we're going to kind of lightning round quite a few of these, just kind of rattle off news, give our brief analysis and move through them. So today and latest in Washington, we talk about some of the problems facing NASA's Mars exploration program. We talk about the commercial crew schedules, a little bit of news on that. An interesting fact about Jeff Bezos and his social media introduction. We talk about the DoD's new advisory committee that's made some big news this week, as well as Donald Rumsfeld's Space Commission report. In the Space News Highlight of the Week, we'll chat about the Senate's $19.5 billion NASA FY18 budget. We'll just go back and forth on that. International news, we give you an update on COPUOS and some long-term sustainability guidelines. And latest in tech, we talk about the Sierra Nevada Dream Chaser, as well as the U.S.'s TDRS system and the current state of the newer launch for that system. And in coming soon to space, we'll talk about, once again, some local DC events. So, Jack, kick us off. Latest from
All right. As you can see, there is a lot of stuff going on in and around Washington this week, both in space and not in space. But this is a space podcast.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
And we're talking about space here, nothing else. So the first thing I wanted to highlight this week was that Lou Friedman, Executive Director Emeritus of the Planetary Society, friend of some of us on the podcast, and all-around space geek, policy aficionado, came out on the Space Review, not in response to, but sort of jumping on the bandwagon set by Jason Callahan and Casey Dreyer, also friends of the podcast, when they wrote an article talking about the future, or lack thereof, of NASA's Mars exploration program. So that article by Casey and Jason was pushing the white paper that the Planetary Society just released about Mars in retrograde, being the name of it, about the problems we're going to be facing technologically and capability-wise with our Mars exploration programs, especially since we're leading up to this supposed 2033 human mission to Mars. So the main problem that Casey and Jason outlined in their article was that there isn't much of a budget for the Mars exploration program. And then we'll get into the budget more when we're talking the Space News highlight this week. But what Lou adds to this is that it's not just that there's a budgetary problem, but there's a priorities problem too, that we're putting all of our, quote, science eggs in the Mars sample return basket. So the whole goal of the Mars exploration program, or at least the science aspect of it, has really been leading up to this Mars sample return. I mean, if you saw the movie Life, or really any movie about humans or robots going to space, there's something in there about bringing a rock or some sort of sample back from the red planet.
Right. We've never gone there and pulled something back to do analysis. It's all been robotic or just or visual from things like orbiters and things like that we have in space.
Exactly. And so everything's sort of been leading up to this Mars sample return. And what Lou points out is that that's a bit of a problem, because if Mars sample return doesn't happen, that could in effect kill the program. I mean, it's just as much like he says is analogous to the mess that we have right now in the human space flight realm by putting all of our eggs in the space shuttle basket. Once the space shuttle was decommissioned, we had no way of getting American astronauts to space. So what's going to happen if, say, Mars sample return, which is slated to be part of the 2020 mission, gets cut? Then where is that, we put all of our eggs in that one basket, to keep using this analogy. And then there's going to be nothing after that. We don't have follow-on programs. Something that he does mention is that the Planetary Sciences Decadal Survey came out in 2011. So the next one's coming out in 2021. And knowing people at national academies, they're already starting the workshop process for creating this document. That's going to be a major policy point within the next decadal survey, is how can we leverage our existing Mars architecture to further what's our ultimate goal of getting humans to the surface of Mars.
Absolutely. No, I think Mars is actually going to be critical in that next decadal survey, given that it's supposed to be the decade prior to the decade that we're supposed to go to Mars. So I'm interested in seeing what comes out of that.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just the Planetary Sciences Decadal Survey. There are multiple decadal surveys that are going to have to be re-upped in the next 5 to 7 years, and that 5 to 7 year time span that's going to be integral to laying the foundation that will lead to humans to Mars by the early 2030s. Now, something we talked about last week being maybe Mars isn't the ultimate goal now that Scott Pace is executive secretary, or proposed to be executive secretary of the National Space Council, and Pence and Trump seem a little bit uneasy about this whole Mars first agenda. So we could very well see humans to the moon by the late 2020s, pushing human exploration of Mars into the late 2030s. But that would give a boost to lunar science and the human spaceflight program. So this is an interesting topic that, I mean, we could probably talk for hours on. So I'm actually just going to move on to the next topic, which is that Commercial Crew, the program that NASA is spending a couple $1 billion on over its life cycle to get Americans into orbit using commercial means. So it's sort of almost using a government program to incubate a commercial space flight sector, which, as everyone in the space community knows, people talk about this very nonchalantly, like, oh, of course there's going to be a human space flight's going to be done by commercial means in the next 10, 15 years. Well, that's not going to happen if Commercial Crew fails. But there's an article in Space News that points out that NASA, SpaceX, and Boeing are expecting flight tests of the Dragon, which is SpaceX's human vehicle, and the CST-100 Starliner, which is Boeing's vehicle, in the next year to year and a half.
I mean, this was the hope amongst that community, or at least members in that community that I know, for a long time, when we stopped, or at least when we slowed down the government funded flights or astronaut crewed flights and started hitching a ride with other places, or as well as stopped or reduced the amount of government built ships that were going to the space station. The hope was always that there would be a smooth transition into the commercial sector, actually taking on this activity that was no longer at the government's frontier. And it's not. And we say all the time that we want the government doing the work that is completely on the frontier. Well, no, the government does some work that is just work that that other companies are sort of unwilling to do. Well, as we've said plenty of times, space is hard, and transitioning this activity out to companies isn't something that you can just take on in good faith that companies are going to be able to just take it on smoothly. They need additional funding. They need someone to sort of pad and lower the risk for those companies going out of business to take on this activity. And it sounds like it sounds like they're coming. They have a plan, and they've been working towards a plan to smooth that transition.
Yeah. So if you have ever heard anyone talk about, SpaceX is going to revolutionize commercial space, and they're going to be the ones that get humans to low Earth orbit, and yada, yada, yada. They're going to be this huge technological innovator for space. You should actually be thanking NASA, because this is the program that started all of that. I mean, back in 2010, 2011, at the sort of impetus of this program, that's when SpaceX really started to get serious about human space flight and got this contract along with Boeing to send humans to the International Space Station. And with the space station's lifespan right now between 7 and 10 years, that might be enough time for, if within the next 2 years we have Boeing and SpaceX flying commercial to the ISS, that 7 to 10 years, 5 to 7, 8 years at that point, could be enough to make this industry blossom. So be sure to keep an eye on this, and I mean, I know we will. But May 2019 is when they're saying the first crewed mission to the ISS will probably be, which is pretty in line with what they were expecting. I know we always talk on this podcast about late 2018 being the big thing for space exploration, especially human space exploration. But that seems to not be the case here anymore. So it's May 2019 is the big day. Well, big month. So keep that in mind. So did you see, speaking of commercial space companies, Jeff Bezos, he got an Instagram account. Did you see anything about this, Newton?
I saw. And did you see that he took a picture of the manufacturing facility for the heavy lift New Glenn launch vehicle?
I didn't know that.
Yes,
that sounds really cool.
So it's literally his first post on his Instagram is a picture, and actually it looks like it's a video, an aerial video. I'm not sure what they use. It looks like it looks like it was probably a drone that they use to hover above this. To hover above their facility, and there's a picture of what looks like him saying on the roof of the facility with a sign that says "Rocket Factory coming soon." It's actually a pretty cool clip. So he just has so yeah, now you can follow Jeff Bezos on Instagram.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So do you think that we're gonna get a New Glenn announcement sooner than quote in the next 2 years?
I doubt it. I think this is him just trying to build up some hype for it. But he scheduled New Glenn for, what was he saying, 2019, 2020?
Yeah.
I don't see them moving that date up, especially because at this point, if you're going to try to do this, they're under a very different kind of pressure than SpaceX ever was for this, because now they're trying to do something that SpaceX has already kind of done with the New Glenn. Granted, the New Glenn sits sort of in that in between stage between the Falcon 9 and the heavy lift. But they have to make it look to the public just as good as SpaceX has been able to. SpaceX was allowed to try and fail because there wasn't really anyone else doing it. Now there's someone on the market who's known for doing it, and they're coming in to say we can do it as good, or if not better, or with a slightly different use case. Well, you still have to prove that you can that you can perform at the level of a company like SpaceX without having launched. So I'm interested in seeing where they go with it, but I wouldn't see them risking trying to launch any earlier than they've already announced. No.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I don't think that I mean, knowing people at Blue Origin and knowing the demeanor around Bezos, I don't think they're going to risk it. But they are going to hype it up a lot more. And I know people in the space community are hyped up about it. But there's not really any way that they can match the amount of excitement that SpaceX has just by launching rockets. Like, they have to do something more. They have to one up SpaceX. And that's really hard to do because even though SpaceX has about a 50% success rate right now, they've succeeded the last 3 times.
Right.
So,
but I would be careful here because it's not, public excitement, don't get me wrong, is a factor for a few things in terms of getting business, but overall, if they are offering a niche use case, and they are the better option for the better option for a mission, then I think I don't want to put too much weight on just how exciting that they are to the public. It's performance that's key. And basically, I think they're going to go into this community with folks understanding, look, this is this is them stepping into the community, not being SpaceX and not performing like off the bat at the level that SpaceX is, because SpaceX got a chance to fail a bunch of times before they passed. But they just have to prove that they can at some point operate better, at that level or better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to come down to government contracts, I think, though. If Blue Origin can make the case that their vehicle is safer and more cost effective, so if it takes the best parts of the ULA Delta 4 Atlas 5 package and takes the best of the reusability of SpaceX and merges them together successfully, they could, I don't think they're going to put either of those major companies out of business, but they're going to become a major contender really quickly in an area that they really haven't had much success in.
Well,
because they haven't tested anything.
But going back, this is what we're talking about when we say use case. They have to they have to perform really well in sort of that mid-size rocket arena, and demonstrate that they can perform really well and be the lowest risk option for the government in those cases. Because I think a lot of this work obviously is going to come from the federal government, but they just have to demonstrate that that they would be the lowest risk for the cost in that case. And that's what they're trying to do with being able to obviously land and reuse and reuse rockets. And like I said, they stand to compete in a slightly different market than the Falcon 9, just in terms of thrust and things like that. So it's not just being able to perform better; it's being able to perform better for the missions that they anticipate the U.S. government will want to conduct, both Air Force, NASA, and all the other members of the newly formed NSPOC, as we've been calling it.
Yeah, I think they are trying to bridge that middle ground between Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, and they haven't released any specs on it. I mean, they've released that chart that compares it to other launch vehicles, but there's not really any specifics in terms of how much thrust it has, how much weight it can get to low Earth orbit, high Earth orbit, geostationary orbit, or beyond. So once that information becomes available, I think members of NSPOC will start paying attention. And although I think it's Eutelsat has the first major payload on a Blue Origin New Glenn, I think once production of New Glenn starts going, we're going to see more Air Force payloads, NASA payloads, things, across the entire spectrum, and maybe even going into the private sector, so telecommunications or remote sensing,
and maybe even some DoD payloads, right?
Oh, absolutely. Well, speaking of DoD, so we've talked a lot about space in defense, the intersection between space and defense the last couple weeks, because it has been a hot topic, especially with the National Defense Authorization Act of 2017 for 2018 coming to the floor soon. And people have been talking all about the Space Corps. They've been talking all about this, but what really matters is the strategic use of space in the near term. How are we using space strategically? So I was sort of looking around in my defense space circles, and I found this article on Defense News that the Pentagon is getting a new advisory committee of 12 different defense experts, 6 from the appointed, or 6 nominated from the Democratic side, 6 from the Republican side, to tackle some of these issues. Now, this isn't something new, of DoD getting an advisory committee for whatever reason. But with all the talk about strategic space, I kind of wanted to touch on this and give you the names of these 12 individuals who will be possibly even tackling some of these space issues. So Mac Thornberry, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Republican from Texas, nominated Eric Edelman, a former ambassador to both Finland and Turkey, served as Undersecretary of Defense for Policy from 2005 to 2009. Also nominated Andrew Krapenovich. I should have practiced that name specifically before. Yeah. Who, quote, is a fixture of the defense community for several decades. He's perhaps best known as the longtime head of the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, which is a think tank here in D.C. Roger Zackheim also was nominated by the Republicans. He's a partner with the law firm Covington and Burling, and he focuses on government contracts. So that will be very important when it comes to space, the acquisition of launch vehicles, of remote sensing data, all that. Adam Smith, who's a Democrat from Washington, also he's the ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee, retired Admiral Gary Roughead. And Roughead served as the 29th Chief of Naval Operations from 2007 to 2011. He was, that's the top uniformed official in the Navy. He served as Commandant at the Naval Academy, the Department of Navy's Chief of Legislative Affairs, and as Deputy Commander of the U.S. Pacific Command. Kathleen Hicks was also nominated. Currently, she is the Senior Vice President of the and Henry A. Kissinger Chair and Director of the International Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies think tank, which they actually do a lot of good work with space. They have a huge section of space on their website, and it's expanding every day. So keep an eye on that organization, as well as Miss Hicks. Mike McCord. Dr. Hicks, sorry. Mike McCord served as the comptroller at the Pentagon from 2014 through the end of Obama's administration, overseeing the DoD's budget through sequestration. So that'll be good going into this next round of potential sequestration after this budget year. Senator McCain nominated John Kyle, who was his former colleague from Arizona, senator from Arizona from 95 to 2013. And he was the number 2 Republican in the Senate from 2008 to his retirement. He also works at Covington and Burling, and he is a visiting fellow with the American Enterprise Institute, which focuses a lot on security issues. A couple more names. McCain also nominated Jack Keane, retired general, former vice chief of staff for the U.S. Army, and also Thomas Mankin, who is president and CEO of the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments. If you know, I'm looking at all these names and I'm seeing the same organizations over and over again. So it's a very insular community. But we're seeing some of the best and brightest minds. The last three names: Christine Fox, acting Deputy Secretary of Defense from end of 2013 to middle of 2014, making her the highest serving woman in Pentagon history. And she was also the inspiration behind the character of Charlie in the 1986 movie Top Gun. Michael Morell, he comes from the intelligence community, having served as the deputy director of the CIA and twice as the acting director. So you get a little bit more of that intelligence side, not just the defense, big bombs and guns. You get the surveillance and sort of cybersecurity side, which also has a bit of space components to it. And then Ann Patterson, just a little bit. Then we get Ann Patterson, the final nominee. And so Ann, Michael, and Christine were all nominated by Jack Reed of Rhode Island. But Dr. Patterson, I'm assuming, served as the Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs from 2013 to 2017. And she previously served as U.S. Ambassador to Egypt from 2013 until 2013. And as ambassador to Pakistan from 2007 to 2010. So that is a awesome history that she has as well. So those are the 12 people. I know that was a long list of people, but those are the 12 people that are going to be tackling some of these major issues. I could very well see the creation of something like the Space Commission, that I have linked. It's some important defense space history background. If you're really into defense space, you're going to want to read this report, or at least the executive summary. The executive summary is like 63 pages long. But the report of the Commission to Assess United States National Security Space Management Organization, just call it the Space Commission. It's instrumental to our understanding of where the U.S. stands in space. It was released in the year 2000, but it is a very important document, and I could very well see an updated version of this coming out of these 12 individuals.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So any hot takes on any of the names, sir?
No, I mean, honestly, it's like you said, the DoD IC space is a very insular community. Not a lot of these names come out as shocking to me. I mean, these folks, I mean, each of these folks have a great background when it comes to DoD and caring for the DoD IC mission. So, I mean, I don't really have any, it's not like some of the other more political picks that we've seen as of late in the Senate or just in the administration in general. So these people seem like they have the background to advise the Pentagon, to identify enough information to generate a report detailing threats to the U.S. And identify and help shape how the Pentagon actually deals with those dangers. So, yeah, good luck to them. That's when it comes to
that's
DoD.
The best.
DoD it's interesting when it comes to both policy and politics. There are politics obviously when it comes to DoD, but there are a lot of people who are trying to deal with very real dangers and get the job done. And I'm hoping these people can help contribute to that.
And I'm sure they will. They come from they're the best and brightest minds, I think. So I wish them luck, and hopefully we do get to hear a bit more about what a real space future or future of space is within DoD, not this cockamamie Space Corps thing that Mike Rogers keeps pushing.
Now, if you want me to talk about other senators specifically today, I can go into it, but
that's for another podcast.
That's for a whole other podcast. Moving on.
So it has sort of been a slow week. So there's been a couple things, as we're pointing out, over the last week, and I'm sure people, if you're following this podcast, you've been following what's been going on with the NASA budget. So the Senate finally released their bill that would fund NASA for FY 2018. So right now there are three different bills or three different proposals for funding NASA. There is the House version, there is the president's request, and then now there's the Senate version. And as always, being the deliberative body, the Senate finds that middle ground between the two. So it's the number to remember for the Senate version, which my analysis would probably say this is most likely to go to the floor. It passed committee. It's going to be going to the full, or passed subcommittee, going to the full committee. Then it'll go onto the floor. Then it'll go to the House. We'll cover it as it happens. But 19.5 billion is the new number. The House version was 19.8, and the president's budget request is 19.1. So sitting squarely in the middle is 19.5. Some of the big things to note is that it does fund the NASA program $437 million above the administration's request, and a little bit under or a little bit over $300 million less than the House version, $340 million. So this is, again, sitting right in the middle. It funds the Space Launch System. It funds the Orion spacecraft. It funds James Webb, does all of those things.
Important to note, it funds GOES-R.
Yes.
The geostationary operational environment satellite R, as well as and joint polar satellite system, which we talked about a bit of last week. The summary, because the full bill has not been announced, states that both of those programs would be fully funded to address some concerns that we talked about last week. So I'm happy to see that.
Yeah, I think it's the JPSS, which they were requesting 586 million. They're actually getting 775 out of this bill. So the people at NOAA are probably very happy to see that this is going forward. And GOES-R,
NOAA
which is,
and NASA, yes.
yeah, NOAA and NASA. GOES-R also is really, really good for our understanding of the Earth, our place within it, how we're affecting it.
A number of different Earth monitoring capabilities are on both of those satellite constellations. And going into a little bit more about what we were talking about last week, according, and this is all speculation because we haven't seen the detailed bill, but it appears that that includes the fully funding the Polar Follow-On program, which supports the developments of both the third and fourth JPSS satellites. So that's really good news to hear.
Yeah. Another important thing to note about this Senate bill that, again, has not fully come out, but the summary talks about the Office of Education, which, if you remember, flashback to, what was that? That might have been 6 episodes ago when we talked about the administration's call to completely cut the Office of Education, shrinking the budget from 100 million. I think so. I think it was that, because it was May. It was May when that came out.
A lot of things have happened since May.
A lot of things. It feels like we've aged 3 years. But yeah, so the president's budget request called for 37 million, which would just cover closeout costs of the office and then wouldn't fund it any year after that. Whereas the House version called for 90 million, which is a 10% decrease from the current funding level. And the Senate version keeps funding exactly the same at $100 million. Which is nice to see, because the education program, Newton, I'm sure you can attest to this, but the education program at NASA is vital to the future security of NASA,
the future security of the United States, the
all
future
of
the United
things.
States. Yeah, like I don't want to put all that on one department, but it is a contributor. The Office of Education at NASA is one of the most inspiring offices of education throughout the government, and it would be sad to see that go away. Space is one of the most inspiring things for children. It's what it gets a lot of folks both into space and other sciences. The Office of Education at NASA helps push for for a series of different programs that help with that. So you're not just talking about, future astronauts or rocket technicians or space engineers. You're talking about people across the board, getting them interested just a tad bit in science for them to kind of go off and go into any field, mechanical engineering, industrial engineering, to go off and find their way. A lot of that starts with sparking children's interest in some field in science in general, and the NASA Office of Education helps to do that. And I'm glad. Well, we'll see where this goes, but it sounds like they're getting funding. Even though is this a little bit of a cut for the Office of Education though? $100 million. What did they receive in FY 2017?
So in FY 2017, they received $100 million. In 16, they got 115.
That's what I was thinking about. Yeah. It was FY 2016. Yeah. So
yeah,
it's a little bit.
It has been going down a little bit. But if it were to stay constant at 100 million, I think that would be good. I don't want to see it go below that. I like $100 million. It's a nice round number. Means that we can fund these great programs that inspire kids and adults to pursue science and the endeavors of space exploration. The other thing I wanted to note, so, what we're talking about right now are these sort of marginal decreases in certain programs and marginal increases. And you might be asking, if this bill is going to be $340 million less than the House bill, where are those cuts? Well, those cuts are in everyone's favorite program, the science program, which is being cut by $290 million from the House version. It did not really go into specifics about what in the science program would be cut. That will come out as the full bill and analysis of the bill from the House and Senate, or at this point, the Senate comes out. But as
I'm really interested in hearing some of those specifics. What their justifications were for cutting. I mean, this might be something to do on the Straight Up podcast to read this off.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm interested in hearing what the details of the full bill is. I mean, once again, what we're reading is from a summary of the bill notes, as well as hearing words from some of these senators and congressmen. So we'll have more detailed information likely next week, as well as, like I said, a potential reading on the Straight Up podcast of not the full bill, but likely a Congressional Research Service summary or something to that effect.
Yeah, CBO usually does some sort of budget analysis around budget time. So with August recess coming up on us,
they've certainly been doing a lot lately.
They have been doing a lot, but CBO is going to be publishing a lot of things regarding the budget, just because it's budget time. They have to get this done by September 30th. Otherwise, we go into government shutdown, or we have to get a continuing resolution, which honestly is probably more likely than not at this point. So this might all be for naught, this discussion. But it will come to light at some point in the next couple weeks, and we can definitely read something about the space program on the Straight Up podcast. I love finding these intersections between the different things that I do.
Okay, well, so yeah, looking forward to that. So, Jack, you seem to know quite a bit about COPUOS. COPUOS. What is this? What is this group? First of all, tell us what this is.
So, the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, COPUOS, is a UN committee that meets, I think it's twice a year right now, and they focus on, no surprise, the peaceful uses of outer space. So they're not the group that does all of the space law stuff, but they do more of the science usability aspect of space. Like, how are we utilizing space? What is space? What does the space environment look like? And so they've been putting together long-term sustainability guidelines for about the last 13 years, if not longer. So COPUOS's whole purpose at this point seems to be finding the agreement between all of the different stakeholders. So there are 84 nations that are a part of COPUOS, this committee, and it's a consensus-based committee. So all 84 have to agree on something before it passes on to the full UN General Assembly, which then it's voted on. So they've been working tirelessly for the past 13 years trying to put together agreements on the sustainability of space. So if you remember, in 2007, there was a Chinese anti-satellite test that sparked a lot of the current going-ons within COPUOS. This test...
It sparked a lot of discussions everywhere.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
let's put it that way.
This test basically created 25% of the debris that we see in space today, and that's the stuff we can see. There is a lot of stuff that we can't see, and I mean, it's really dangerous up there right now. I mean, yeah, it's space. There's a lot of it. But as it gets more crowded and congested over time, we're going to see incidents there was an incident with Discovery back in, I think it was 2005 or 2006, where I think it was a paint chip or something almost went through the windshield of Space Shuttle Discovery. I mean,
God.
We're going to start seeing incidents like this as more people enter space, and maybe even not just people, but also satellites. I mean, our entire communication system at some level relies on satellite communication to varying degrees, depending on service providers, depending on all the different aspects of telecommunications. But space is a major asset to our economy.
I mean, terrestrially too, it's something where we've seen, not just Chinese, but there's been multiple reports of Chinese space debris crashing into Earth and hitting hitting other nation states. I remember there was a report last year about a massive metal object that was assumed to be part of a missile rocket or some satellite that went crashing down into Burma that looked like it was Chinese in origin. Like this is a world issue where they're trying to, it appears, non-militarily address these kinds of issues and how we can stay safe and have a long-term infrastructure.
Yeah, and so that's the purpose of COPUOS and their meetings, their plenaries is what they're called, on the long-term sustainability of outer space activities, because we can't, there's already this situation we have to deal with in space of space debris, space weather, contested and congested space environment, and we want to deal with it civilly and without the outbreak of conflict or lawsuits or the enactment of some article of the Outer Space Treaty. I mean, we want to be able to build the space environment, the international space environment from the ground up, and not through, lawsuits and damage and sanctions and damaged property. Yeah. So COPUOS has broken up this working group into 4 focus groups, basically. And that is, the first one is sustainable space utilization. So that's how space can be utilized to improve life on Earth. So that's using satellites for remote sensing or for telecommunication purposes. The next one is for space debris, which is what we talked about. And that also includes space situational awareness, which is actually the topic of a paper that I just wrote that will be coming out soon. We'll link when it comes out. The third group is space weather. So that's solar wind, that's the magnetosphere, that's all of the different, I guess, the sciencey side of things, or at least the astronomical side of things, for dealing with things that happen in space. So that's a lot of space radiation is a huge issue for them. And then finally, the fourth group is regulatory regimes and guidance for new actors in the space arena. So their job is building from the ground up this regulatory regime that fits all of the stakeholders' needs, and looks to address problems that might occur further on down the road. Even if it's 20, 30 years in the future, we want to be talking about the types of problems that people might encounter. So if it's lunar bases and, Robert Bigelow wants, this piece of land, how are you going to, work that dispute out? What is going to be the regulatory regime or the regulatory process for getting something to the moon, to Mars, beyond, deep space, low Earth orbit? Finding those common grounds between stakeholders is the purview of that group.
What's interesting about this? I mean, we talked about this, when or at least we had similar discussions to this when the UN was being formed, having this sort of international group that would pursue different types of regulations, and attempt to create, these the things like treaties or agreements between countries for the safety and security of the world. And now we're trying to do this in space. Now, we've seen in the past, obviously, that the UN wasn't necessarily always able to stop war from happening, right? That's almost an impossible goal to achieve anyway. But here in space, it's much more difficult for an international group to break down, because the different countries that are executing space operations are so heavily reliant on each other that these agreements, at least in my view, are going to be stronger. And I think this group is going to be more, I hate to say this, but more effective in the long run when it comes to building up space infrastructure than anything we could have had with our attempts for the UN. Granted, once again, UN has a completely different mission, but that's what comes to mind when I hear about this organization, COPUOS.
Yeah. So this is something to be following if you're really into space law and international space agreements, especially if you really liked when we were talking about Ted Cruz and the Outer Space Treaty, because this is
when we were talking about the Outer Space Treaty. Nobody likes us talking about Ted Cruz.
I mean, I don't like talking about Ted Cruz, but sometimes you have to do it. So keep an eye on this. Just maybe some numbers to note is if you get confused by the number of guidelines that they're proposing, don't worry, because they're confused too. Since 2014, the number has fluctuated radically. So they started off with 33 guidelines. It was worked down to 18 by the end of that year, then went back up to 30. Now it's at 29, and they finalized 12 of them. So that means that all 84 countries accepted 12 of them, and the remaining 17 of them are slated to be analyzed and worked on for the 2018 plenary. However, that number is again fluctuating, as they only worked on 11 of, I guess maybe they added another guideline, because so we included a link in the show notes. The Secure World Foundation, our friends over there, Brian Whedon and his friends, put together an awesome fact sheet, 3 pages, that lets you understand the entire COPUOS long-term sustainability guidelines process and what they've been going through. But so it looks like they added guidelines in June at the last plenary, and they finalized 11 of them. But then they're going to be pushing them off until later this year, for October 2017 for the intersessional meetings. I think those are also in Vienna. I'm not quite sure. So if you're confused by the number, don't worry. We all are. Keep your eye on it, and as they come out, we'll keep you all up to date.
All right. Okay, so real quick, we'll fly through listen tech. We're already 49 minutes in at this point.
This was supposed to be a short episode.
This was going to be a short episode. There was a lot of policy based news this week, and I mean, latest in tech really. It's more like latest in tech planning. So these couple of stories that we have are more about things that are happening in the future than technology things that are happening right now. So the United Launch Alliance signed a contract with Sierra Nevada Corporation to launch the Dream Chaser spacecraft to deliver cargo to ISS. Sierra Nevada Corporation recently announced this past week that they've selected ULA's commercially developed Atlas V rocket to launch the first two missions of its Dream Chaser cargo system in support of NASA's Cargo Resupply Service 2 contract. So the Dream Chaser spacecraft was originally envisioned to fly with astronaut crews, but will now fly on space missions with cargo deliveries that are headed to ISS. That change meant that the spaceship will return to Earth on autopilot, using navigation aids to descend to a runway, deploy its landing gear, and then touch down like NASA's space shuttles. So they, after some initial ground tests, some of the engineers behind Dream Chaser have said that they plan on performing some captive carry tests, with the shuttle suspended under a helicopter, and using those exercises to verify some of the movements of the craft's aero surfaces and navigation instruments. But it looks like they're going to go with ULA's Atlas V rocket to do this. Jack? I know that you've had some a little bit of a background with ULA. How long have they been working on and testing the Atlas V?
The Atlas V rocket has been in testing for. I mean, they've been flying. I think it's something close to 100 have flown.
Right. But yeah.
71. I'm looking. I just looked it up. 71 have flown in total. There are different configurations. They all have numbers. So the one that that ULA will be using to launch the Dream Chaser is the 552 configuration, which has a dual engine Centaur upper stage. But the Atlas V has, from what it looks like, 9 different configurations. So and 552 is not even listed, so it's like 10 different configurations.
Right. So this goes back to the point that I made earlier, which is talking about going with the lowest the lowest risk option. This is obviously a mature rocket that the Atlas V from ULA. It's a lower risk rocket that can be used to do these resupply missions, and that's why it makes sense for, well, in this case, Sierra Nevada to use it for the CRS-2 contract. It's not like NASA didn't have any say in that. Sierra Nevada contracted them. But this is something that ultimately has to be judged by the NASA customer, and it looks like they're going with a very safe option in this case.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Atlas V has flown 71 times, with 70 of those flights being successes and the other one being a partial failure. I think it's this almost the same breakdown, except I think it's 131 launches for the Delta IV and only one partial failure. But I mean, like, the Atlas has been in development since before the Mercury program. I mean, the SM-65 Atlas missile was one of the first ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, that was developed in the 1950s. It flew in the 1960s, the Mercury program, and it's been used ever since as sort of one of the workhorses of NASA and DoD. So to see it being used again, the latest iteration Atlas V, to carry cargo to the International Space Station is a welcome sight, because if anything is going to go wrong, it's not going to be ULA's fault. The Dream Chaser has had a rough past, as you noted, that it was originally intended to fly crew, and actually won some contracts under the Commercial Crew Program. But after some, I wouldn't call it auditing, but after some investigation by NASA, they decided not to go with the Dream Chaser, and instead stuck with only 2 as opposed to 3 different contracts one with SpaceX and one with Boeing.
All right, so best of luck on the to Sierra Nevada using the Atlas V, and I'm sure we'll have more news coming soon with that. So moving on to something a bit different, the TDRS system. Jack, are you familiar with the TDRS system at all?
I am not.
So I have some familiarity with the system. The TDRS system is a tracking and delay relay satellite system, and effectively TDRS is the way that we get objects that are on the other side of the planet, orbiting around Earth or just off in deep space, to communicate with ground stations here in the U.S. The TDRS is used by a number of different government organizations, as well as a number of different project missions. Hubble communicates with it. James Webb will be communicating with it. A number of different organizations and missions will be communicating with it in order to pass data from space here to Earth. And right now, TDRS is in the middle of launching, or towards the end of launching, its third generation of satellites. The satellite network came online in the early 1980s. The first tracking and delay relay satellites were launched, and recently we've been launching the third generation of TDRS. TDRS is LNM, and recently, in a statement issued late July 21st, NASA stated that the satellite manufacturer Boeing for the TDRS-M satellite and the launch services provider United Launch Alliance are reviewing a new launch date in August for the tracking and delay relay satellite spacecraft. The launch was originally scheduled for August 3rd. However, it looks like it's going to be delayed. The cause appears to be that Boeing is looking at replacing an omnidirectional S-band satellite, an S-band antenna on the spacecraft. That antenna was apparently damaged on July 14th during some final closeout activities at an Astrotech Space Operations payload processing facility in Florida. TDRS-M was, at the time of the incident, being prepared for encapsulation into a payload fairing and installation onto an Atlas V rocket. So this was, it was getting ready to launch. We are, as we record this, we're about a little over a week out from its initial launch date, and now Boeing's going to have to go back and replace that antenna so that we can have S-band communications. That's for those of you who are unfamiliar with the terminology. S-band is it's RF radio frequency language for the electromagnetic spectrum area between 2 and 4 gigahertz, and it typically crosses the conventional boundary between ultra high frequency and SHF at 3 gigahertz. So they're going to be reviewing the date. They're replacing an antenna. I wouldn't even speculate as to how long it's going to take for them to retest all of that. But this is it's one of those small things that can come off of a ship that will require an entire year's worth of testing to be conducted again in a much shorter time frame. But we will see with TDRS. Best of luck to them. So unless you have any other news, I guess we can head straight to coming soon to space.
Yeah, that's about all I have. Again, it was both a slow but busy week. A lot of stuff happened, but not anything.
Happened, but not anything that's thrilling. It's the TDRS-M is pretty important, but it's not. It's not this major. They're replacing an antenna. Okay, we'll move on.
And somehow we filled up an hour of that.
Right. That's because a lot of crap happened. It's just. It wasn't the most thrilling crap.
Wait, are we covering that crap?
No, the other crap.
Okay, all right.
Yes. Okay, so as far as coming soon to space, I've only got one thing. We mentioned this last week. The Astronomy on Tap event will be happening next Tuesday, August 1st at the DC9 nightclub. Once again, Astronomy on Tap is a monthly event hosted by Astronomy on Tap DC. They put on a series of speakers from the space community who've we've gone. Jack and I have gone multiple times to go see speakers from NASA, ESA, and a ton of telescope institutes from around the world. They're a great group of folks. They're a great group of folks who put on the show and retweet us fairly often.
Hi, Steph.
Hi, Steph. And so yeah, make sure to check out their show if you're in the DC area. Once again, that's next Tuesday, August 1st, between 8 and 10 p.m. at the DC9 nightclub.
Yeah, and come by. We'll be there. So if you don't have anything else, I think we're just getting over an hour right now. So I think we should wrap up this week's episode 21. Can you believe that? Episode 21.
That's a lot of episodes.
Yeah. And some of you have been listening since the beginning. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who listens to this podcast regularly and shares it with your friends. We like hearing from you. So if you ever have suggestions for topics to cover, or guests you want us to try and get on the show, please leave a comment on Facebook, tweet at us, text us. If you have a carrier pigeon, you can send it, but I don't know how I'm going to receive that. So, thank you.
High bandwidth. Yeah, high bandwidth. All right. You got nothing else?
Yep. As always, I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton.
Ad Astra.